The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, the final judgment having been delivered. 9 years. 9 long years for a child whose entire world had crumbled around him. But it was not the judge's verdict that left everyone in the room shaken, it was the final words from the boy himself that changed everything. 12-year-old Ethan Rivera walked down the long, echoing hallway flanked by 2 officers. His small hands were bound by cold steel cuffs, far too large for his frail wrists. His steps were short and slow, his gaze locked on the scuffed tips of his sneakers. The officers guided him forward, their faces stoic but not unkind. "This way, son," muttered one of the officers. Ethan's lawyer, Michael Harper, stood at the grand wooden doors of the courtroom, his face calm but focused. As Ethan approached, Harper crouched to meet him at eye level. "Remember what we talked about, Ethan," Harper said firmly but gently. "No matter what happens in there, keep your head up. You're stronger than you think." Ethan's eyes shifted up, giving Harper a brief, wordless nod. His face was pale, exhaustion visible in the dark circles under his eyes. The handcuffs jingled lightly as he adjusted his hands. Inside the courtroom, the quiet murmur of conversation ceased the moment the doors swung open. All eyes turned to Ethan. As he was escorted to his seat, the crowd watched with curiosity and unease. The air grew dense with anticipation. Judge Marcus Caldwell entered soon after, his black robe swaying with each step. He was known for his strict but fair rulings. His sharp eyes surveyed the room, his presence alone demanding order. "You may be seated," Judge Caldwell announced. He adjusted his glasses as he scanned the documents on his desk. "We are gathered for the sentencing hearing in the case of the state versus Ethan Rivera." In the front row, Ethan's mother, Isabel Rivera, sat with her hands clutched tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from weeks of sleepless nights. Her husband, Marco, sat beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed it might crack. Their eyes remained fixed on their son, their shared pain palpable. "Stay strong, Isabel," whispered Rosa, a family friend seated behind them. "He's going to need you now more than ever." "I'm trying," Isabel's voice cracked. "But I've already lost one child. I can't lose another." The prosecutor, Nathan Reed, rose from his chair with a slow, deliberate motion. He was tall and commanding, known for his methodical approach to every case. "Your Honor," he began, before issuing the sentence, "the prosecution requests to review the critical evidence that has led to this conclusion." "Proceed, Mr. Reed," Judge Caldwell replied, his tone sharp but measured. On the night of November 12, around 11:45 p.m., Reed began, Luna Rivera, an infant just 3 weeks old, was found unresponsive in her crib. The medical examiner's report concluded that she died of asphyxiation. A quiet sob escaped from Isabel, and Marco placed a firm hand on her back. "The evidence is indisputable," Reed continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. "The blanket used to suffocate the child had Ethan Rivera's fingerprints. In addition, Linda Perez, a neighbor, testified that she saw Ethan leaving the baby's room shortly before the discovery of the incident. In the back of the room, Miss Sarah Valdez, Ethan's teacher, sat with a hand over her mouth, her brow furrowed. She had noticed something had been off with Ethan for weeks, withdrawn, distant, his once bright spirit now shadowed by sadness. "Your Honor," Harper rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket. "With all due respect, I'd like to remind the court that Ethan is a 12-year-old child with no prior history of violence or aggression. He's a boy who—" "Objection, Your Honor," Reed interjected. "The defendant's age has already been taken into account." "Sustained," Judge Caldwell replied. "Mr. Harper, stick to the sentencing phase." Harper nodded, his lips pressed into a firm line as he returned to his seat. Ethan's eyes remained downcast, his small fingers fidgeting with the metal cuffs. Harper leaned in, his voice low. "Ethan, you have the right to speak if you want to. This is your chance." For a moment, Ethan's lips moved as if to form words, but then he fell silent. His head dropped lower, his shoulders tight with strain. In light of the seriousness of this case, Judge Caldwell's voice echoed with finality, and after considering the defendant's age and the evidence presented, the court has reached a decision. Isabel's breath hitched, her eyes filling with tears. Marco's leg bounced anxiously. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Rivera, the judge's voice boomed like thunder, you are hereby sentenced to 9 years in a juvenile detention facility. This sentence reflects the seriousness of the crime but takes into account your age and the potential for rehabilitation. The bang of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Isabel's sobs were loud, raw. Marco's head bowed, his hands gripping the sides of his chair. Sarah Valdez's lips quivered as she lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. No. Isabel's voice cracked as she reached toward Ethan. Please, he's just a boy. Order in the court. Judge Caldwell's voice thundered as he struck his gavel. Order. As the officers approached, Ethan's gaze finally lifted. He looked at his mother, his lips trembling. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. But as Ethan's eyes scanned the room, they landed on his uncle, David. His small frame tensed as if a current of fear had just passed through him. Dr. Evelyn Hart, the court-appointed psychologist, didn't miss it. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze shifting to David, who sat with an unusually rigid posture, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his thigh. Later, as officers escorted Ethan out, Dr. Hart's mind was racing. She'd seen that type of fear before, the kind children had when they were terrified of someone close to them. Her heart pounded with a growing realization. This wasn't over. But this time, it would be. Dr. Evelyn Hart's resolve solidified. She knew she had to act quickly. Moments later, she approached Judge Caldwell in his chambers, her expression firm but respectful. Your Honor, I have grave concerns about Ethan's uncle, David. There's something in Ethan's reaction that I've seen in children who've experienced prolonged fear and control. The judge's eyes narrowed. Are you saying you believe David may be involved? I'm not just suggesting it, Dr. Hart replied. I'm telling you there's enough behavioral evidence to warrant further investigation. Within hours, a welfare check was conducted at David's home. Police discovered unsettling evidence, notes, drawings, and messages that pointed to a history of manipulation and control. With this evidence, the authorities reopened Ethan's case. 3 days later, Judge Caldwell called an emergency hearing. Ethan, his parents, and his lawyer sat in front of the judge once more, this time with renewed hope. After reviewing the new evidence and testimony from Dr. Hart and the investigation team, Judge Caldwell declared, this court finds that Ethan Rivera was not the perpetrator of the crime. Instead, he was a child caught in the crossfire of an adult's sinister actions. Isabel burst into tears, her hands covering her face as Marco held her tight. Ethan's lawyer patted him on the back, whispering, It's over, Ethan. You're going home. The officers released Ethan from the handcuffs. He rubbed his small wrists, blinking away tears as he walked straight into his mother's arms. The courtroom's heavy air lifted, replaced by the warmth of justice finally served. This wasn't just Ethan's victory. It was a reminder to everyone in that room, and everyone hearing his story, that no child's silence should be ignored. Every glance, every subtle movement, every unspoken fear can be the key to a truth that's waiting to be revealed. The message of this story is clear: never ignore the subtle signs of fear in a child. Sometimes their silence hides a truth that could save them. If you notice something unusual in a child's behavior, don't dismiss it. Be their advocate. Their safety could depend on it. What would you have done if you noticed Ethan's fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the signs we often miss and how we can protect our children.